It's a pleasure to have you. So Varshini is the executive director who's heading the ISDS Society. ISDS stands for Indian Schools Debating Society. And that looks at taking competitive debating to the next level for all students across India. So Varshini, thank you so much. I do want to tell the children that you were pretty much the first ever Indian to serve in the motions committee and the chief education team of the World Championships. So you are going to be pretty much coached by the India team representative over here. And she's finished with her work at the consulting firm, apart from finishing her master's from IIT Madras. So Varshini, with that, I'm going to definitely hand this over to you because I'm sure you're going to make the session far more exciting, and I will take it back from you after you have finished. Let me just hand over. Yes, you have, I believe you do have the right. So all yours, please.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that introduction, Anjali. And hi, everyone, and good evening. Are you all feeling energetic?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I have one yes. Can I get an unmute and yes at the same time?
Yes, ma'am.
In three? Okay, that's
yes, ma'am. Yes,
awesome. So very quickly, what are we going to work on today in this session? So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to do a quick introduction to myself and tell you all about what I've been up to and what the organization I work with does. Second is we're going to do a little bit of work on how to create an argument. So I hope you've got your books and pens out because that's the bit of the session. Trust me, you want to really listen to carefully and sort of use that in your debating competition that's upcoming that OGLI is running. The third is I've actually brought two very, very special people to this call. That's a surprise. I will introduce you to them once I'm done with my little bit of teaching. And we will watch them do a demo of what we've just gone through in terms of creating an argument. And finally, I'm going to let you guys ask me any questions. And of course, wherever Anjali will step in for answers, those that we can use that time to ask her questions as well. Does that work for everyone? If yes, give me a thumbs up. Amazing. The last thing to say is, unfortunately, we are in a virtual world right now, and I'm finding it a little bit difficult to keep my eyes and hands on everything at the same time. So if you guys have got questions as I'm explaining things, feel free to drop them on the chat and I'll definitely look at them, or ask them when I pause naturally and say, do you guys have questions? Does that make sense? Because I'll find it really hard otherwise if we all start talking at once, just as we would in a classroom, but a little bit harder than even that. You make an argument in favor of X. You can't just say a sentence as in how you like. You've got to be really careful and construct an argument in favor of X. And what we're going to learn to do in these next few minutes is how do we construct that argument. First step, and Anjali's gone through this already, but most of your topics will fall under Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs, and all of them start with the words "this house." Don't be intimidated by that. I'll quickly tell you what the really cool background to the words "this house" are. But broadly, here are some examples I've got. So TH is this house, BT is believes that. So this house believes that all university education should be free. This house believes that developing countries should ban child labor. This house believes that governments should stop extracting non-renewable natural resources. This house believes that governments should give welfare to those below the poverty line in cash rather than in kind. Example, rations that we often know that people that are working in our houses collect. So I'm going to pause here for 1 minute and let you take down those 4 topics so that I can quickly explain to you what this house means, but I don't want you to write as I'm speaking. So I'm going to pause there for a second. And you guys can give me thumbs ups when you've taken those 4 topics down. those 4 topics. So those are example topics. So those are the types of topics that you might be getting. So just for you to practice.
Okay, ma'am. Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah.
What are the what are the topics we will get on 1st May for debating?
So that's a question that Anjali, if you take, I'd really like that. So I can't tell you what the topics are. But Anjali, if you're on the call.
Sure. We will take all the FAQs and we will give the bit of slides about the tournament at the end.
Got it.
So please stay while the session. Let's wait for some time. We will answer all the questions.
Amazing. So you guys heard that. All of your questions will be answered at the end. Don't jump the gun, be patient. And we will ensure that we clear all your doubts. But for the moment, here are some examples of topics that you can think of.
Ma'am, do we have to write these?
Okay, so really cool fact. This house, the words come from the idea that someone in the government is proposing a bill and everybody else in that legislative house is either voting in favor of that bill because they want the bill to pass or voting against the bill because they want the bill to fail. So as an example, some member of parliament in the Lok Sabha says, you know what, here's a bill that I've created. I think we as India should pass a policy that makes all university education free. Every public university should not charge any fees at all. And I want to pass this bill. What the process then happens is everybody in the Lok Sabha will debate that bill. They will have a discussion on whether this is a good idea or not, on whether this will benefit students or not, on whether quality is more important or access is more important. So they'll have all these conversations. And at the end, that bill will go for a vote. If a majority in the parliament vote in favor of the bill, that bill will then become a policy that's implemented across the country. If a majority of people vote against that bill, then that bill does not become a policy and things stay as they are. So that's why it says this house. It draws from a parliamentary tradition of debating, where the debate on a policy is actually being held in the upper or the lower house in the legislative body. To make your life easier, when you read this house believes that, you can either read that as we, or you can read that in general as governments around the world. So we believe that university education should be free, but who can make university education free? Governments, right? So you have to debate from that perspective. Or some places it's explicit. It pretty much says this house believes that governments should stop extracting non-renewable natural resources. So in general, you can think of it as we, or you can think of it as governments. One of the really useful things that you get out of debating is the fact that debating opens you up to multiple perspectives from all across the world. So don't just restrict yourselves to India or just the state of Maharashtra or the state of Tamil Nadu. Debate the topic as if it's being debated in general in governments around the world. Sorry, did you have a question, Jasmanpreet?
Yes, ma'am, I wanted to ask that when is the competition?
You're going to pause on that. You're going to spend this time listening to me and what I'm teaching and ask me questions that are most relevant to what I'm teaching. If you've got questions that aren't, you're going to pause and ask them at the end. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Adya, did you have a question?
Yes, ma'am, I had a question. Ma'am, can you explain again what is this house?
Yeah, for simplicity's sake, just think of this house as we. So we believe that all university education should be free. We believe that developing countries should ban child labor. We believe that governments should stop extracting natural resources that are not renewable. We believe that governments should give welfare to those below the poverty line in cash and not in kind. Sometimes this house can also mean governments in general. So if it instead said this house would make university education free, then that means the government will make university education free. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that make sense to everyone? Everyone give me a thumbs up if you're on board. Amazing. Okay, so once you've got that topic, the next step we're going to figure out is how do you actually construct an argument? First question is, what is an argument, right? So an argument is a reason for why we should vote for or vote against the topic. So imagine you are proposing a bill in the parliament and you really want to convince everybody to vote for that bill. Then you will make an argument in favor of that bill. Now there'll be someone else who says, no, Navya and Jasminpreet, I really don't like this policy you want to create for this country. So I'm going to stand up and make a speech explaining to everyone why every single person in this room should not vote for this bill, should vote against this bill. So that's reasons or arguments why you will vote against the topic that opposition makes. So proposition or the team speaking for the topic, otherwise called government, will make arguments in favor, and opposition or the team speaking against the topic will make arguments against.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, Angad.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I wanted to ask that do we get a choice to speak against the motion or for the motion?
That's a really good question. I think the best part about debating is that it makes you have to argue things that you may not personally and truly believe. And you only get to do that if you don't get to choose which side of the topic you're on. I will let Anjali confirm that this is true, but in most debating, you don't get to choose which side of the topic you fall on.
And ma'am, how long is the speaker time? For how long do we have to speak?
Quick pause. Am I talking to you about speaker time?
No, ma'am.
What was the amazing instruction I gave you? If I'm not talking about it, if it's not directly relevant, pause until the end, right? So you're going to pause until the end for me? You're going to remember that question for later?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Okay, so the most important thing to realize about debating is that most debate topics exist because there are problems in the world that exist, and we're trying to have a discussion on how we solve it, right? And because of that, every argument in a debate round is almost following a structure that goes, here's the problem, here is how the topic will solve that problem, and here's why we should therefore vote for the topic, right? So fundamentally, every argument should prove why implementing the topic will solve the problem if you're in favor, or why implementing the topic will create a problem if you are against. Does that make sense to everyone? So usually, and let's just take a look at what I mean by that, right? All university education should be free. So for proposition, they're trying to solve a problem of people finding university education very, very unaffordable, which means poor people are less able to attend college. So that's the problem that they're trying to solve. Opposition might say, no, if nobody is paying for college, the quality of education provided in our colleges will reduce. So opposition is explaining how this policy creates a problem. Similarly, this house believes that developing countries should ban child labor. We're actually talking about that policy because proposition thinks that children who should in fact be going to school are instead being forced to work in really bad conditions in cracker factories. They're working, doing manual labor, and they really don't want that to happen. So they're like, we will solve that problem by getting the government to ban this. That means the government will punish anyone that's caught doing it. That means parents will think twice because it's illegal to send your child to a factory to work. On the other side, opposition might say, parents who are really poor, whose children will work illegally anyway, will find it very hard to report if you threaten them that you'll put them in jail. So that's actually creating a new problem now. Similarly, in the next one, proposition might identify a problem saying our non-renewable resources are running out. So we should be switching to renewable resources. So every debate in some sense is trying to solve some problem. That's why we're having it. Proposition's job in their arguments is to explain why the topic solves the problem. And opposition's job is to show that the topic doesn't actually solve that problem. It is creating more problems instead. All on board so far?
Ma'am, I have a doubt.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, who had a doubt?
Ma'am, I'm Kanish Ganediwala. Ma'am, I'm saying that, ma'am, if like you said that if the proposition group has to say that that their point is right, but the opposition group has to say that the point that the proposition group is making is wrong. Ma'am, but if some members of the opposition group know that the proposition group is right, so ma'am, is it correct that they can still be in the opposition party?
So in terms of the government, you will find many cases where it doesn't actually matter whether you're on the opposition party or whether you're not in the opposition party. You can vote for a bill that somebody else is voting for, that some other party is proposing. If, for example, lots of bills both parties might believe are a good idea, right? But in debating competitions, an opposition team cannot make arguments or cannot make points in favor of proposition.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so let's get into creating an argument, right? We're going to use this topic as an example. This house believes that governments should rapidly expand civilian nuclear energy programs. Right? I'm going to wait for you guys to take that topic down because that's what we're going to use as an example for the rest of the class. I'm going to make the quick assumption that not all of us know what civilian nuclear energy is, but don't worry, I will be explaining that in the very next slide, but I'm pausing for you to take that down. So give me a thumbs up once you've taken it down.
Ma'am, do we have to write this?
Yes. Ideally, you should be writing down everything, but specifically, yes, write this down.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, Anraj?
Ma'am, I had a question. Ma'am, what if I'm speaking against someone and the point which he is speaking is correct and I don't know what to speak against it. So what will I do?
I'll tell you what. There is no world where there's a debate topic where there isn't something to say on both sides. Don't ever go in thinking, oh, but that topic is so unfair because only the other side is right. Go in thinking, I will find a way to win this round. And you will find that you don't have a situation where you don't know what to say. Because all the topics are being set with the confidence that there'll be something to say on two sides. That's why it's a debate. Yeah?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, Rigya, you had a question.
Ma'am, I want to ask that we can put false allegation on the person who's speaking right, so that we can make them stop.
I'm so sorry, Rigya, that was super unclear. There was some disturbance. Could you just put that question down in the chat? So I'll definitely take a look at it and answer it.
Sure, ma'am.
And I'm seeing more hands go up, which will happen. Totally understand. So Olivia, Prapti, just drop your questions on the chat and I'll handle I'll handle them when I take a natural break. Awesome. I'm now going to the next slide. Very quickly, just going to tell you what civilian nuclear energy is. Okay. Basically, that means using nuclear power for electricity. So to give you guys all a bit of context, right now our electricity comes from coal, comes from petrol, comes from hydroelectricity, which is water, comes from solar energy, which is the sun. One of the sources of electricity is also nuclear. Specifically, these come from particular elements. Examples of these are uranium and thorium. Just putting that down. So anyone that's interested can go look up how nuclear energy is created and how electricity is created from these elements. To be clear, you can also create weapons of mass destruction with that, with those elements. But this debate is about using those elements to create electricity.
And the nuclear bomb.
You can create a nuclear bomb, but the process to create a nuclear bomb and the process to create electricity are very different.
Yes.
And this is the debate about using nuclear elements to create electricity.
Yes, ma'am. Like uranium, titanium.
Okay.
Excuse me, ma'am.
I'm going to finish this out before I can take more questions. So if you've got questions, they're going right on the chat. Okay. The first step when you see a topic to create an argument is ask yourself, what is the problem you are trying to solve? And here's an example that I've done for you. Keep writing. So step one, what is the problem that exists right now with electricity such that we're even asking for this new policy? And I've given you guys an answer. So my answer is, in developing countries right now, the amount of electricity produced is not meeting the needs of the people, which is causing a lot of load shedding. So load shedding means people, especially in rural areas and semi-urban areas, go long hours without electricity. And it's not just rural and semi-urban areas. I used to live in Chennai, and for years of my life when I was younger, we would have 2 hours or 3 hours of scheduled power cuts every day. That's because the idea is that in these countries, enough electricity is not being produced. So that's the problem I'm identifying that I want my policy to solve. So I'm going to pause, just checking with everyone if you understood this problem.
Ma'am, I didn't.
Sorry, did you say you did or you didn't?
Ma'am, I didn't understood.
Okay, so I'm saying that right now there is a problem where we're not producing enough electricity. Does that make sense, Ayan?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. The word load shedding is referring to the fact that there are, on the newspapers, sometimes they publish saying today between 5, every day for the next 1 month from 5 to 7, you will not have electricity in the house. That actually happened to me when I was younger in Chennai, but also happens to lots of people for hours together in rural areas. Some rural areas don't even have electricity connections, and this is a problem across the world in developing countries. Okay, so I've identified this problem, and you know what I want to say? I'm trying to say that governments should do this topic, which is expand nuclear energy programs to meet this electricity need. But the next step is, here's a question. Why can't we expand what we're already doing? Like, why do we need nuclear energy? Why can't we just do more of what we're already doing to produce electricity, right? So step one, you identify the problem. And step two, you explain why that problem can't be solved by whatever measures are being taken right now. That is, why can't existing sources of electricity improve this problem? Why can't it solve the problem? And I've explained that, right? Second is, our existing sources are either coal and petrol or renewable energy sources like wind and solar. Coal and petrol are limited fossil fuels. That means they can run out in the coming few years. Within the next couple of decades, within the next 50 years, we will run out of these non-renewable sources of energy, because you can run out of them quickly, but it takes hundreds of years for them to form again. Plus, coal is actually really inefficient. You need lots and lots of coal to produce small amounts of electricity, right? So coal is really, even though that forms a lot of our electricity production, it's not a good source of energy. What about renewable and wind, right? They're not bad, but you need a large amount of space to, for example, create a wind farm. You actually need kilometers of land to set up a wind farm that's acting strongly. And solar cells, solar batteries are still inefficient. They still can't give you lots of electricity for long periods of time with short amounts of time.
Ma'am, but India and other countries are trying to make large solar farms.
That's a good point, but guess what? I'm not making the
Ma'am,
point.
but they are still inefficient. Ma'am, they are still inefficient because
No, ma'am,
sometimes
the wind will
dust
not blow
come
every
from the
time.
solar panels. And
Ma'am, the wind will not.
Guys,
Excuse me, ma'am.
it's time to pause. Everyone pause. We are not having a debate on whether this topic is good, bad, what side of the topic we can be on. We are learning what the steps of making an argument are. Of course, there are going to be things you can say on the other side. Of course, there are things you disagree with. But the point of this is not what can you say on this topic. The point of this is how do you construct an argument. So I'm going to ask you to hold your horses on your thoughts on the topic and instead think about the steps. Step 1, identify the problem and explain the problem. Step 2, tell us why whatever existing solutions are being tried do not solve the problem. And here I'm explaining why the existing solutions of renewable energy and coal are not solving the problem. Once again, I'm going to ask you guys to drop your questions on the chat because I want to make sure that we go through this entire process. I promise you that I will address all your questions. Right? So step 2 is, why aren't existing solutions solving the problem you identified? So step 1 is, what is the problem? And explain the problem. Step 2 is, why is it that existing solutions don't solve the problem? The answer to what are solar cells is basically batteries where you use and convert solar energy into electricity.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep. Step 3 is explain why the topic you are proposing will solve the problem you have identified, right? So how will the topic, that is expanding nuclear energy, solve the problem? And here's my explanation. I've said a very small amount of uranium or thorium can produce a very large amount of energy in a very short period. Plus, there are an abundance of these elements in the earth because we haven't used it extensively so far. If the government quickly expands its nuclear program, it'll be able to access these resources and energy needs will be met efficiently, cost effectively, and quickly, right? So what is the problem? Why aren't existing solutions solving the problem? Why is it that your topic or your policy that you are proposing is solving the problem? And last step, why is solving the problem even important? So developing countries are being held back from growth and development because of a lack of electricity. Meeting this quickly means businesses in rural areas can operate better, households have light, that means people's lives improve and economic growth increases. So a full argument needs to go through all these 4 steps. right? And that's what a full argument looks like. So I'll repeat the steps. Step 1 is identify the problem and explain it. Step 2 is tell us why existing solutions, and if you can guess what the other team's solution will be, why all those solutions will not solve the problem. Step 3, why is the solution you are proposing going to solve the problem? Step 3 is why is the solution you are proposing going to solve the problem? And the final step is why is it even important to solve this problem?
Ma'am, could you please repeat this?
Yeah, I'm going to go over this once again, and I'll go over it from the start. This is the topic, which is governments should rapidly expand civilian nuclear energy programs. A number of you asked me once again what civilian nuclear energy is, and I've explained that here. That refers to using radioactive elements like uranium and thorium to create electricity. Right now, we create electricity from coal, we create it from solar energy, we create it from wind energy, we create it from hydroelectricity, which is water. This is a topic that's saying we should get the government to start quickly creating it from radioactive elements like uranium and thorium. I'm going to take questions at the end of this, so wait and pay attention to what I'm talking about. So that's your topic. When you want to create an argument, the first thing you do is identify a problem. The problem I've identified, that is step 1. What's the problem? What is the problem you are identifying relating to this topic? The problem I'm identifying is that developing countries right now are not producing enough electricity, and lots of people are going for long periods of time without light and electricity. That means businesses can't operate. That means you and I are just sitting in the darkness uncomfortably at home. It's less safe for women to go out when there isn't light out at night. All of these are good reasons to have electricity. And the problem is that these countries are not producing enough electricity. That's step 1. Identify and explain a clear and specific problem. Step 2 is, once you've identified the problem, the automatic question is going to be, why do you need a new policy to solve this? Why isn't what we're already doing enough, right? So immediately think about, what are we already doing and why is that not enough? So why can't existing sources improve this problem or solve this problem? So I'm saying our 2 existing sources are coal or petroleum and renewable sources like solar and wind. The problem with coal and petroleum is up there on the slide for you to read. The problem with renewable energy sources like wind and solar also up there on the slides for you to read. So step 1, identify and explain the problem. Step 2, tell me why the stuff we're already doing or existing solutions can't solve the problem. Step 3, how will the policy you are proposing, how is the solution you are proposing the right solution for the problem? Why will that solve the problem? So explaining here why that will solve the problem. And finally, explain to me why solving this problem is even relevant or important. So together, all those 4 things together make an argument.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask you a question.
Sorry, give me 1 second, Jasmanpreet. Just give me 1 second. I want to pause to ensure that everyone's actually listened to what I've said and taken down this argument. Okay, so a bunch of questions on the chat that I'm going to answer first, and would highly recommend those of you who got your hands up to put your questions on the chat as well. If nuclear energy leaks, then what will happen? That's something that you've got to be doing consciously as the team that's in favor. So you can't just say, we'll expand nuclear energy programs. You also obviously have to say that you will do this in a safe manner. So it's not just enough for you to say that you'll do it. You also have to explain how you'll do it. And usually you'll explain that by saying you'll do this in a safe manner. And then opposition can still question that, but that's something you'd have to do. Can we put false allegations to the person who's speaking, correct statement to make her stuck in situations? The simple answer to that is lying is generally a bad idea. Never do that in real life. Never do that in debating. This house believes that, were they just samples or are they real topics? They were just examples. Your real topics will be released to you for the competition. Anjali, let us know how we'd be doing that. But those were just example topics that I had up on the slide.
Excuse me, ma'am, I have 2 doubts. Can I ask?
You can put them on the chat, Jasmanpreet, because there are a number of people who also had questions, who both got them on the chat and whose questions I'm answering. It's not very nice to interrupt or have their answers while I'm giving them be stopped. So either wait until I go through all the questions on chat or put them on the chat. Love it. Someone tells me nuclear energy is their favorite topic. That is great. I've answered what civilian nuclear is. Hopefully that was clear. If we're saying against and the one who's speaking is using false allegations, what should we do? So trust that you will not be lying. Trust that the other person will not be lying. However, if you know, because you have evidence to show that something they're saying is false, you can always raise that in your rebuttal, in your speeches.
Okay.
What are solar cells? I answered that same question on false allegations. Ma'am, nuclear energy does give electricity. Can't we make petroleum and coal as powerful as nuclear to produce lots of electricity? That question is answered in the second orange box on the slide. That is literally the answer to the question, why can't we solve the problem with existing sources? Because by nature, coal is inefficient as an energy source. You need lots of coal to produce a little electricity, but you need very little nuclear elements to produce lots of electricity. That's just by scientific nature of these elements. When do we get to know the topics? What if we don't know a lot about the topic and if it's on the spot? Can we have a paper on our site to help us remember key points? I think in general, it should be fine for you to have paper that helps you remember key points. I would say that debating is not a competition thing. It is a preparation that you do for life. So you should be reading a lot, reading the newspaper, keeping aware of things that are happening around you. But whether you get time to prepare or not, that's a question I will let Aubrey take for you. I've already answered the question of if someone is lying. Hopefully I repeated step 1 and step 2 and that was clear. Okay, what does the opposition do for these 4 steps? Very similar process. What opposition does is identify a problem that the policy will create, give reasons why that problem is created by the policy, and then explain why that problem would not exist if not for the policy and why it's important to avoid that problem. So the exact same thing, but flipped. What is the problem the policy is creating? What are some reasons why it's creating that problem? If this policy doesn't exist, what is the good thing that will happen? And why is it important in the debate? Do we get to know earlier with whom you're going to argue? Probably not, and it shouldn't matter whom you're arguing against. Can we use the internet if we get the topic 10 minutes before? That's something I'll let Aubrey take, and they will answer that question for you. Should we include replies to obvious rebuttals in our argument? Do not concern yourself a lot with what the other team is going to say, but if you are able to make an educated guess on what they will say to solve the same problem you've identified. So in this debate, any op team will say, let's use lots of renewable energy. it is useful for you to use that in why renewable energy won't work. That's a way to anticipate what they're going to say and respond to it. Step 4, why is it important? In this step, do we have to state the negative effects? Yes, to some extent, you have to explain why it's important to have electricity. It doesn't have to be too detailed, but it has to exist. What if we are against the topic and your opponent is against the topic? That's just not possible. Will there be rebuttal rounds? How long should we speak? So these are all questions that Augley will take at the end of this. If there's a topic that says something like, should we eat animals, that you don't like going for, then what should you do? Unfortunately, this is the world. You're going to have to deal with the fact that you don't quite like a topic, but you have to argue in favor or against, or whichever side you don't like anyway. And that's the answer. Okay, there's a bunch of questions here that unfortunately aren't questions that I will be taking. There are questions that Augley will be taking at the end. But let me just take a quick look at everything else on the chat. Amazing. Yeah, these are mostly it. Adia, this is the 4th time you've asked the question that there is already an answer to in the second orange box from the top on the slide in front of you. No, you can't do the same thing with coal and petrol because for obvious reasons, coal and petrol by nature can't give you the same amount of electricity that you can get from nuclear. Can you repeat the 4 opposition steps quickly? Yes, I can. Step 1 is identify a problem that the policy creates. Step 2 is give reasons why the policy is creating that problem. Step 3, if you didn't have the policy, what is the good thing that would have instead happened? Step 4, why is that important? Ahmed, did that make sense?
Excuse me, ma'am, please can you answer my doubt?
Yeah, what is your question?
Ma'am, my question is that the nuclear energy article, is it available on the Auxi app?
Sorry, this isn't an article. What the presentation that I'm running by you right now is not on the app, but hopefully you've both been taking notes and you know what the topic is, so you can Google it.
Ma'am, I have another question that the topics which are going to come in the competition, you will tell in this class or not?
That's not a question for me. That's a question for Augley, and they'll take that at the end of this.
Yeah,
discussion.
and I'm just going to address it in a bit.
Can I ask a doubt?
Yeah.
Ma'am, that
actually, guys, hang on. The answer to that right now is no. You can't ask doubts because look at what I've got on this presentation. Do I have a section for questions at the end?
Yes, ma'am.
Amazing.
Yes,
so that's when you're going to ask any more doubts that you've got, because I want to introduce to you the 2 people that are doing your demo for the day. So I'm going to stop my share after giving you the next topic. Want you guys to try for both sides, for proposition and opposition. This house believes that governments should ban zoos. Does everybody know what a zoo is?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Amazing. So I'm just going to pause and give it 2 minutes, give you all 2 minutes to silently think about this topic and try following the steps and creating an argument for and creating an argument against. And after 2 minutes, I'm going to call up the 2 very special people that I was talking about and get them to do an argument in favor and do an argument against. And I'll let you guys watch that. And then I'll take questions at the end. Okay, so we're back, and I'm going to introduce you to two amazing women that I have had the pleasure of knowing in my life. Rasmika and Shahad. Can you guys get your videos on, please? And Rasmika, can you give us a little wave? And Shahad, can you give us a little wave? I can't find Shahad, but that's fine. I'll pin her to the screen when she's doing it. Okay, so just to give you information, Rasmika is from Chennai. She is in grade 8 and she is on the Indian national squad this year. She is going to give you guys one argument in favor of the topic that we will ban zoos. Listen carefully. It's going to be a simple speech where she does a bit of an introduction. She explains how she's going to ban zoos as the government, and then gives you one argument. At the end of that, I'm going to pause. We'll go through the steps of an argument once again, and I'll show you how Rasmika did all those steps. After that, Shahad will do it for opposition, where she rebuts Rasmika's point and then gives an argument that opposition will run for the same topic. And then we look at the 4 steps for opposition when she runs the argument, and then I'll close out. Okay, are you ready for this? Are you ready for Rasmika, everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, hello guys. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A world in which cute baby giraffes and cubs have to see their parents getting shot with unknown vaccines every single time they try to protect their babies. When they are forced to live in a cramped area and can't escape these clutches. When they are tortured just so that they can be put on display and humans can be pleased and entertained. We think that's abhorrent. We are incredibly proud to propose. What's our stance in this debate? We have a 5-point stance. Number 1, we think that zoos are places where animals are likely kept within cages or restrictions which aren't their natural habitat, and they're put on for a show to be looked at by visitors. What we want to do is completely ban them, which means they no longer continue to function and it will be illegal to continue operating them. Secondly, how will we implement this? We are going to give current zoos a 6-month time frame in order to close all operations and completely shut down. The animals will be sent to wildlife sanctuaries where they are let back into their natural habitat. Thirdly, we are happy for these zoo workers to get skill retraining so they can get other jobs to work in. The infrastructure within the zoo and the land will be used for building public services like schools, etc. Fourthly, if this is violated, we will seize the land, shut it down, and arrest the individual behind the operations and send animals back to sanctuaries. We think it's still going to be pretty easy to track down zoos because it requires large amounts of land and money which are easily traceable. Lastly, we think it will be fairly easy to get them into sanctuaries because the money which would have otherwise gone to zoos and all the funding they have will now be shifted to the betterment of sanctuaries and for transportation purpose, etc. We have one main argument in this debate, which is that this reduces animal abuse. There are 4 reasons why this is true. Firstly, what is the problem in the status quo? We think that zoos cause animal cruelty. Secondly, why does this problem exist? There are 2 reasons. Firstly, they are deprived of their natural habitat. No matter how much money you put in or land you build, it's impossible to get the exact same conditions as their original habitats. Animals are often put in cramped enclosures, not having mates to communicate with, and so on. Secondly, animals which are predatory by nature are likely to be drugged in order to put them into submission. Even if not, they still face severe psychological issues, like when they are forcefully made to breed or are put in isolation all the time. It hurts their nature as animals and they live a lower quality of life overall. Thirdly, why is this particularly problematic? 2 reasons. Firstly, you damage the health of the animal regardless of whether you give it timely food. It's never going to match its actual habitat. The animal is punished in such an environment with no possibility of ever escaping the cage it is put in and treated as an object. If it tries to fight back, it's drugged and made weaker, or it's punished. Secondly, in the long run, it becomes impossible for these animals to go back into the wild. They either suffer within the zoos and become weak, otherwise they die when they go into the wild because they do not have survival skills. This also hurts the future generation which miss key traits, which means a lot of animals get hurt overall. Why does our policy uniquely solve this? Two reasons. Firstly, we think we can still get benefits within zoos without the harms. We can still get the natural habitat and allow animals to live their actual lives without holding them captive and putting them in aggressive practices. In sanctuaries, it's going to be you in the animal's habitat and not the animal in yours, which helps keep the identity and nature of the animals. But secondly, we think existing measures, which are like animal rights activists trying to get the betterment of zoos, better treatment, and so on, will not work, because regardless of the end, at the end of the day, a zoo is still a zoo. You're still going to captivate it and put it inside a cage. You're still going to punish it if it doesn't obey what you say. It's still going to be treated as an object, because that is the basic fundamental line behind what a zoo is. That's why we think when you ban zoos, you completely cut off funding for these people to continue their actions, and they can't function. We are uniquely on our side save animals in the future which might be captured, and also the current ones which can be given a chance at their original life. We are incredibly proud to propose.
Okay, so let me just put myself back. Okay, so I've removed the spotlight. Can you guys all see all of us again? Can you see me again?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. I'm going to quickly share with you how she constructed that argument. I've got it up here on a slide. Hang on. Okay. So you can see on that slide, problem she identified: zoos cause animal cruelty and damage the health of the animal. The animals then are later unable to go into the wild. They become weak and often die. Right? So that's the problem that Rasmika identified. She then says, why don't existing safety measures solve the problem? So why isn't what we're already doing, why isn't just giving them more food and taking more precautions solving the problem, right? And she tells you why. That's step 2, right? She says, even if you put in extra money, even if you have regulations, whatever you do, animals are in zoos. Zoos are not their natural habitat. Zoos will always be zoos. You'll have to put them in cages. You'll have to drug wild animals so that they don't hurt people that come to see them. So whatever regulations you take, a base minimum of abuse is always happening to them. Why does banning zoos solve the problem? When zoos are banned, people are forced to shut down the zoos because they'll be punished, and they'll be transferring the animals to go to their natural habitats where animals do better. This is important because the lives of animals is important. It's important that animals aren't in constant pain and suffering, and this is avoided when we ban zoos. So that's the 4 steps of the argument she constructed. So she first had a catchy introduction. She then told you how they will ban zoos. So they said they'll cut funding, they'll punish people who open up zoos, and they'll transfer zoos to natural wildlife sanctuaries. Then she said, I have one argument for why we should do this, because this avoids animal abuse. And she made that one argument with the 4 steps. This is the problem. Here's why existing solutions won't solve the problem. Here's why we should ban zoos, and that's how it will solve the problem. And this is why it's important.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask, sorry to interrupt between. Ma'am, yeah. I wanted to ask that till which time this class will go?
I'm going to finish off in just 5 minutes, and then you'll probably want to spend about 15 minutes asking your final questions to Augli.
Oh, okay, ma'am, thanks. Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, can we quote examples?
Yes, you can absolutely have examples. This particular argument didn't have examples, but you can slot in an example at any point. So if you want to say X% of animals in zoos are dying, you can put that in the problem box. Or if you want to say X% of animals relative to animals in zoos were shown by a study to be healthier, you can put that in why does banning zoos solve the problem. But broadly, did you guys with that speech generally follow the 4 steps?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Sorry, I'm going to pause, not take questions because I want to do the last bit of demo. But did you guys generally follow those 4 steps?
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Amazing. So I'm now going to get someone to do
Yes,
it.
ma'am.
I'm now going to get someone to do it from opposition. Shahad, can you get back online and show us? Yes, so that's Shahad. Let me spotlight Shahad for everyone. So Shahad is in grade 10. Very, very special because the first person from Chandigarh to have ever made it to the national squad, and has a little bit of time on her hands, luckily for us, because the grade 10 exams have been cancelled. So Shahad, can you please do the opposition speech for us? Her speech will include a piece of rebuttal to Rasmika's point and then an opposition argument.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes.
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 Yes. I'll be starting in 3, 2, and 1. Side proposition in today's debate claims that they protect animals from abuse. No matter how noble their intentions are, they end up driving people away from the very cause they supported in the first place, which is animal welfare. The only side in today's debate that works in the direction of animal welfare is side opposition, which is why I'm very proud to oppose. I'll be doing 2 things in my speech. Firstly, I'll be rebutting Rasmika's first argument on animal abuse. Secondly, I'll be presenting my own practical argument on how we advance animal welfare. On to the rebuttal then. What did we hear from Rasmika? The first thing we heard was that animals are kept in poor conditions in zoos, as a result of which we further animal cruelty if we keep zoos open. 2 pieces of responses to that. First, we think there is already discourse against stopping animal cruelty in zoos. Animal protection groups have taken care of giving animals more spaces, keeping them with their packs, ensuring that they get access to proper nutrition. As more and more people are becoming more and more aware about animal welfare, they're likely to not go to zoos if they don't practice good policies. I.e., now zoos also have an incentive to agree to these conditions in the first place because people will simply stop going to zoos in the first place. Therefore, most of the problems pointed out by first proposition can be solved on our side of the house. And also note that endangered animals need to be saved. They need to be given extra care. For example, they need to be kept separately in order to ensure that they don't become victims to predators, in order to ensure that they don't catch a disease and are able to breed properly. All of this is important in order to ensure the survival of the species, which is why even in instances when animals are strictly not allowed to move out, are kept in cages, it is important because it helps ensure their survival over the longer term. Having rebutted that, let's now move to my own argument that talks about how zoos increase interest in wildlife conservation. If zoos are banned, people won't have sufficient interest to actively take part in wildlife conservation projects. Why is this the case? Without zoos, people do not have sufficient alternatives to make them interested in animal welfare. Here is how people are likely to get information about animals on their side of the house. One, they're likely to get this information by reading about various species in their school curriculum, knowing about it by their teachers. Note that this kind of interaction isn't likely to stick in their minds for a long time. There is a huge difference between engaging with an animal in real time and then forming that sort of personal and emotional connection versus reading about that species once in a science book. The personal interaction in zoos allows children to absorb the daily activities of the animals. When children see something, they're likely to retain that information in their minds for a longer time. But second, people are likely to get this information from documentaries on various platforms in case zoos do not exist. It is important to understand that people who watch these documentaries on National Geographic in the first place are people who care for animals in the first place. An ordinary person isn't likely to sit down for 2 hours every single day and watch a documentary. But third, crucially note that side proposition cannot just say that now people will go to wildlife sanctuaries to have an emotional connection with animals. This is not going to work because wildlife sanctuaries often only exist in remote areas, which means that you probably have to go out of town to engage with wildlife. However, zoos often exist in almost every city, making them more and more accessible. But wildlife sanctuaries also are a lot more expensive, which is why people wouldn't go to them as an alternative over zoos. Having said this, it becomes clear that zoos are more accessible and informative for a large majority of the population, particularly children. What happens in instances when zoos are not banned? One, we think people go to zoos regularly. For example, children going to zoos with their classmates during a school trip. When they start developing an interest in the animal, observing their daily activities, they're likely to get more people to visit the same zoo. This looks like a child asking their friends to come along with him, taking your relatives for a day out to the zoo, etc. This means that it is only on our side of the house that we get more and more people interested and curious about animals. But second, and also note that often people want to do something, but they don't have the means to do it. This problem also exists for many new animal rescuers who don't know how to go about rescuing animals. This is particularly solved by zoos because zoos advertise conservation programs by the profits that they gain. They advertise programs for endangered species, things like raising awareness in your community, things like taking care of those animals by coming to the zoos regularly, which means that people, specifically children, now also have an avenue for volunteering in these zoos and taking care of animals along with their friends and social groups that also provide them company. Side opposition ensures that people get involved in conservation programs, which are very important for saving the rich biodiversity. I'm very proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Shahad. And let me just quickly pull up the argument that she made, show you the 4 parts, and then I'm going to stop talking for a bit and let you guys go so that you can ask all your questions, and I'm going to hand over to Aubrey right after. Okay, so this, sorry, let me just reshare this. So that was Shahad's argument. So the problem is people will not take serious interest in wildlife conservation. Second step is, why won't other things solve this problem if not zoos? So why does banning zoos actually create this problem? Non-zoo methods to interest people are either through reading it in your curriculum or through watching documentaries or through visiting sanctuaries. And she said why none of those things will work. Reading about it in curriculum is not interesting. Those who watch documentaries aren't people who aren't people who are uninterested in creating an interest. It's people who are already interested to begin with. So you're not increasing the amount of interest. And sanctuaries are not easily accessible to a large number of people because they are remote and they are high cost to get to. Why can zoos solve the problem? They are easily accessible. They're part of school field trips. It creates curiosity and increases tourism. And it's important to create this interest because interest in conservation animals goes a long way in wanting to save biodiversity and taking actions to save biodiversity. Therefore, it's better for animal welfare as well as for biodiversity.